I'm Sarah Wilson, and you're listening to the Roots and All Budcast. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Roots and All Budcast. A couple of weekends ago, I took part in a 2-day no-dig course at Charles Dowding's site down in Somerset. And if you're not familiar with the no-dig technique, in a nutshell, it involves, no digging. So the idea is that you can prep ground and manage it going forward by applying a layer of compost to the soil and planting directly into that layer. So Charles uses the technique on his site mainly for growing veg, but he's also prepared his ornamental borders in the same way, and he uses the no-dig technique to manage those going forwards. So I have to say that having completed the course, although I was already using the method in parts of my own garden, I'm even more convinced of its efficacy, and I'm going to be doing my utmost to avoid digging from now on wherever I'm gardening. Charles has written a number of books, and he also has a YouTube channel where you can find out more about the nuts and bolts of no-dig and how you can use it in your garden. And he also runs courses, and if you get the chance to attend one of the courses that he runs at his homemaker's site, it really is quite a magical experience, and I can't recommend it highly enough. And Charles very kindly took some time to chat to me before the second day of teaching began. And I didn't want to go through how the technique works because, as I say, you can research that for yourselves and you can check out all of Charles's work online. So I asked him some questions that occurred to me after participating in the first day of the course. So the first thing that was interesting during the course yesterday was you were talking about obviously mulching on top of the beds, and you spoke about using compost, and you've got quite a specific definition of what compost is to you. Can you just explain that?
Well, you're so specific in a way, actually. It's quite general. It's anything decomposed. And I say that in order to encourage people not to feel worried that they have to use perfect compost. I think sometimes they worry about that. And so it could be like well-rotted animal manure that's even a little bit lumpy. And it's amazing how you can sow and plant into quite imperfect-looking surfaces. When it's compost, it's soft and roots just love getting in there. So, anything decomposed, whether it's old manure, leaf mold, your own compost you buy, green waste compost, spent mushroom compost, there's a magnificent range of possibilities.
Well, and we're often told that certain crops like certain nutrients and things. So do you find a better yield if you plant certain things in certain types of compost?
Well, probably if we're talking about the few percentages points, but basically not, actually. And again, that comes back to what I'm always looking to do is simplify things. And growing has been taking too much from the fertilizer manual and looking at nutrient inputs and outputs. And I look on it more as enlivening soil to make available what's there already. So that's a large part of what the compost is doing, or any organic matter mulch on the surface. It's feeding soil organisms, which then get busy and enable plants to find what was already there but previously unavailable, locked up, immobile, because it was kind of dead in the soil. So you don't need to think in terms of spreading different compost or different amounts of compost even, really, for different crops. It's about just getting soil ready to grow.
And you never use any supplementary fertilizers?
I'm not here. I've tried it at different times over many years now, but in my previous incarnations, really, even farming in France. But here at Homemakers, I have used occasionally some rock dust, which is basalt rock in not exactly powder form, powder going to granules. And that can be a useful correction if you think you've got mineral imbalances for soils which are just not doing quite how you think they maybe should be. That's as far as I go, really. Or seaweed would be another one that I'd put in that category. So natural mineral supplementation can be good. Most of the time, though, I just feel that one doesn't need it. There obviously are problem soils, and if you've got one of them, and you'd know that really by looking around you, and you'd just be seeing nearby plants or even the weeds looking quite miserable. That would be a sign that you need to perhaps use something like rock dust. There's a company called Remin who are brilliant for that, just basalt rock.
Okay. And the other thing I thought was quite interesting is obviously when you start doing it, you've got the very rich layer of compost on the top. Then you've got your normal soil, as it were, underneath with perhaps some grass and stuff in it. And I asked you this yesterday. Do you find that plants root through that nice layer of compost into the soil below, or do you find they just sit in that top layer of compost?
The defined layer does not last for very long, so the answer is totally yes. Like in year one, I was managing to lever out some parsnips which had gone through the compost, and the taproot of the parsnip, the edible part, even was going into the soil about 3 inches, 7 centimetres already. So it's always becoming, in time, a very undefined layer between the compost and the soil. It starts off as obviously that precise definition and boundary, but soil life is very quickly moving from the soil below into the compost above, even through the cardboard, which only lasts 2 months really before it decomposes. It's a temporary weed barrier. So you very quickly are creating, or the soil life is creating a lovely rich soil, but darker on top where the compost layer was as it gets eaten.
And you mentioned you can do the technique in autumn and leave it over winter. And in your opinion, the nutrients don't leach out of the compost. Why do you think that happens or doesn't happen?
It's based on the evidence of what I see. And, like here, because I am indeed spreading all my compost in the autumn months, before Christmas mostly, and then I don't spread any more until the following autumns. And during the summer, I'm doing a lot of second plantings without adding anything more. So I'm doing just once a year application of organic matter. And if leaching was happening, the growth by autumn would start to look weaker. And it absolutely doesn't. Visit us to this garden in the autumn, September, October, and you can see it on the videos. The growth is just still really strong and abundant. So I think it's about going back to what I was saying about nutrients, and it's not nutrients in, nutrients out so much as the compost it's got some nutrients, and they definitely are mostly water insoluble. I wouldn't say all entirely, but mostly. And so they just stay there. And that whole interaction with soil life, that making them available as plants grow, the fungal network and all that kind of thing, it's a joy to behold. But it makes gardening so much easier. You don't need to worry about that.
Yeah, okay. So you're adding year on year, and is there a point where your yields kind of stop increasing, do you think? Will it plateau, the improvement that you see in your garden?
Yeah, more or less. I think homemakers might be at that point. It's exciting, though, to always look at ways that one can improve. And yeah, I'm not too sure what the next horizon might be, actually. But I'm certainly very happy with how things are going. And I think any soil, when you start out, particularly for vegetable growing, vegetables are very demanding plants to really get the best from them. And so that's why it's worth using a higher initial dose of compost. And it's not a wasteful or excessive use by any means, because you're getting, I'm getting amazing yields here from, say, the no-dig bed where I record all the yields. So I've got a very good record of that. And it's just 5 feet wide, 16 feet long, 1.5 by 7 by 5 meters. And each year that bed is growing 100 kilos of vegetables from 2 barrow loads of compost that I put on each autumn. And 100 kilos, and that's a wide range of vegetables. So it's a fantastic output from really, I think, quite a small input. But yeah, we'll see how that goes in the future.
Yeah. And what crops do best with using this method?
Oh, well, they'd all do. I wouldn't really like to single anyone out, actually, because then if you're not careful, you get into this thing of being, I think, too specific. I would say just, I spread the same dressing of compost on all my beds, whatever I'm going to grow. And the carrots are wonderful, the parsnips, the broccoli's great, the salads are abundant, the cabbages are enormous. It's like everything works, really. And
is there anything that doesn't work in it?
Well, I'm struggling to think. Really, no. You can see it here, can't you?
Yeah, yeah.
It's all looking really, really clean and healthy. Healthy more than anything, I think. That vigour and health that you get from the soil being healthy.
So are there any drawbacks to it?
Well, honestly,
you're struggling. No.
I wouldn't call it a drawback, but you just need to be a bit organised, But that's true for doing any good job, and I'd encourage any beginner to appreciate that there's a certain amount you need to know to grow great vegetables, and it's not so much about no dig; it's just about learning the timings of sowings and all those kinds of things. So inform yourself, and you can do it for free now because there's so much information on the web. My website's full of stuff about growing great veg and no dig growing and all that. And yeah, just Go for it.
Yeah. So I think sometimes gardeners don't like to be told that they've been doing things the hard way.
Yeah.
So do you find an element of that when you try and tell people about it?
Yeah, I think that is the hardest thing for the people I find easiest to teach and quickest to understand no dig, actually often beginners, because their mind is kind of clear of any preconceptions. And I appreciate very much when I see how experienced gardeners might be struggling a bit. Because I take your point entirely. There's a lot to unlearn, actually. And I really feel that gardening, like many professions, has been made too complicated. And I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, really, but, there are a lot of vested interest as well. People who've got a stake in selling stuff, obviously, which often I think you don't need. People whose careers depend on maybe making things a little bit more complicated than they need to be. And so, that builds a need for knowledge, which often isn't there, actually, because things are much simpler than they're often made out to be.
Yeah. What's the most commonly asked questions, or what do you teach that gets met with the most disbelief, maybe?
Yeah. Well, I think a nice one is when I say you can walk on your beds. The look of disbelief on people's faces. Again, which I totally understand, because most of the media is full of advice. Oh, you should never walk on your beds. And that shows with no dig the fact that you can, and as I was showing you yesterday, even almost dancing on them, and the soil doesn't really move. It's got a spring to it, like a forest floor, because there's that strong natural structure. It's firm, yet it's open. So that's a nice one, actually, to demonstrate, because it goes to the core of another misconception, which is that soil needs to be loose and fluffy for plants to root into. And that's rototilling and all this kind of thing that you just don't need to do, actually damaging soil, really. And I think weeds is another one. People who've always cultivated, dug, rotivated, whatever it is, and are used to coping with the amazing flush of weed growth every spring, summer and autumn. And with no dig, you just don't get that when you leave soil undisturbed. So sort of that's a strong element of kind of disbelief, really, initially. I think that, wow, there can be so few weeds.
Yeah, I can see that. I suppose the last question is there a history of this kind of method being used maybe in overseas or historically? Does it have a background?
I'd love to know more going back longer. But in say just in the last century, there is very much. It's been practiced, like in America, there was this lady, Ruth Stout, and her book called No Work Gardening, which was obviously a bestseller with such a title. And she was mulching with hay back in the 40s, 50s and 60s. But it's never really caught on very much. There were a few people in the UK doing it. And in the early writings of the Soil Association, I've come across that and having great success. Yeah, so why didn't it catch on? I'm intrigued. But I do feel that now it's different with the internet. It's helped me particularly to really get it out there. And people see these lovely images. The photographs are probably more convincing than anything. And I do feel it's exciting now. Actually, there's a real takeoff happening. And the fact that it's got into the Royal Horticultural Society garden at Wisley, their edibles garden is now 100% no dig, apart from one little trial bed. And Kew Gardens, they're no dig. In the UK, National Trust, a lot of their gardens no dig. BBC Beech Grove in Scotland. There's a bit of a revolution happening. It's exciting times.
Yeah. Is it happening overseas as well? Is anyone picking it up particularly overseas?
Well, I don't know too much, but I do get very encouraging feedback through my YouTube videos and from all over the world, in climates even, where I've wondered how applicable this might be, like Arizona. I've had 2 or 3 recently, very dry climates where compost mulch is apparently working really well for the people trying it. So I'm finding the videos are great for that, because there's enough information in a video and visual as well that people can just adopt it. And I have heard from, many countries, exciting things.
Yeah. And where can people go and find out more about you and see your videos and things?
I would recommend, my YouTube channel. It's just Charles Dowding. My website, charlesdowding.co.uk. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. So, just check out the social media.
So, as with I think all of my guests, I feel really privileged to be